manga industry roundtable. I'm your MC, your host, Patrick. I'm here because I like mango. And joining me, returning from last time, we've got Ed Chavez, the publisher from DENPA.
Howdy.
And we've got Ajani Oloye, who's a freelance manga translator and editor. So the three of us are going to be talking once again about manga, the manga industry, and kind of what the heck's been going on. It's kind of a mix of got a decent. We're gonna start with covering some pandemic stuff because that is still the number one thing on everybody's mind for obvious reasons. And let's start with this. So it's been about 6 months since everyone started sheltering in place. And how has it changed your work experience? And do you see any long-term changes that you think are going to stick around once the pandemic dissipates?
Do you want to take that, Ajani, first, or?
Yeah. I guess since I probably won't have as much to say as you. I mean, for me, it hasn't. From 6 months ago, I guess, hasn't been many changes. I just have kind of gotten to more of a rhythm or adjusted to the kind of schedule that I have with this. I can't. Yeah, there's not really that much. I mean, there are things on the other side of where I'm me working and producing work, and on the other end of where I turn in the work, there has been some issues and things still have some printers that are kind of backed up, and things are kind of generally slow because of people working remotely in some cases, or on the Japan side. Sometimes there's been a little, things aren't as smooth as they used to be. But I think at this point, everyone's kind of gotten used to it. And I don't know when people are going to go back to offices and things. I know in my case and some other people I know that there are no plans for that until at least 2021. So I think it's going to be this way for a little while.
Just a quick question. I guess you guys haven't gone to the office at all, right? So everything's just been remote?
Yeah, everything's been remote. For Vertical, at least, the office, technically you're allowed to kind of go there, and every once in a while someone will go there to pick up books and things. It's usually one person at a time, but that's about it. There's no, it kind of came up at one point. It's do we want to go back? And it was very clear that it wouldn't make any sense to go back. So.
And then, so how are you guys doing? I assume you guys are still doing meetings and stuff. Is that all happening over Zoom or? Yeah,
it's happening over Google Meet. We just have a weekly meeting, and then there'll be other separate meetings that they have without me that I think are doing the same thing through Meet, and everything else just through email. And even one thing that's kind of new to me was before all this happened, my full-time job before, I had always wondered about dealing with proofs.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah,
that whole process. But it's not been so bad. It's just basically they send out all the printer proofs and F&Gs and things to each person who's involved who needs to check it, and then you just sign off on it from there. I think it's one person who may have to mail it back, but I don't have to mail anything back, luckily, and that's also been okay. No real problems there.
So you guys are just mailing the proofs between each other, or are
we're having in my case, the printer is mailing them to us individually, and then we kind of check in with each other on any corrections or any issues that come up. And I think maybe one of the production people they actually are the ones that send a copy back. So.
Okay. Wow. I wonder if that's something we can do. I don't know. On our side, it's a little funny hearing what the old office is doing, because it's a number of the things that we do at DENPA kind of are extensions of what I used to do at Vertical. to a point. So we do a lot of things by paper. And historically speaking, like we, Nicole and I, me and the production manager, we just kind of go into each other's rooms and talk and go over proofs and revisions and things like that. So obviously now, a lot of that is kind of remote, but as we're to an extent just kind of getting into a bit more of a groove releasing books, increasingly we're actually going back to the office. I'd say maybe, in my case, maybe once, twice a week. In Nicole's case, maybe 2 to 3 times a week. And particularly when we're dealing with proofs, we tend to interact with each other quite a bit. So either myself or her will get the proofs. Generally, initially we were having them sent to me and I would make my markups, because ultimately she'd be the person, kind of like in your case, Ajani, like the production manager, would be the person talking to the printer. Mm-hmm. So she would get the proofs after me. But increasingly, now that we're both going into the office a little bit more, we're just having them sent to the office, and depending on our schedules, one of us will go look at them first, and then we would send them off to the other person. You know, Nicole drives, so she might drop them off at my place or just leave them on my desk if I come in the following day. So under those circumstances, I won't say things are exactly what they used to be, because we're still doing most of our work at home. Like I'm still doing almost all my editing and a good chunk of my sales meetings and marketing stuff at home. But when it comes to late and production as well as accounting, I had to do most of my accounting at home anyway, at work anyway, because the bank is closer over there and everything. So I also just didn't feel that comfortable bringing like the company checkbook home either. So we're having all these invoices at home because I have the cat. I don't have like a filing cabinet here. So I was all from like week 1 of shelter in place. I was still just going back and forth, more so like once a week or like once every 2 weeks back then. But it's becoming a little more frequent now. I wonder, regards to like long-term changes, and I totally agree with you. Like, yeah, things are really slow with the printers right now. Like they warned us in advance that like particularly this fall is going to be really bad because of the presidential election. So like, yeah, almost every politician has like a book out right now.
I mean, that was a problem before the pandemic. Just the political atmosphere has, jammed up the printers, I guess. So yeah. So
that's been really slow, but just like even the supply chain is a problem. Like I know getting stuff just to Amazon is slower now. And BNN is a lot is a big big problem right now in regards to like them getting stuff and like reordering. But things are gonna stick around. I hope that certain things on the Japan side would stick around. Like I love not having to fax as much as I used to.
I was just about to say that's the thing I've heard about. That's change that a lot of people have been happy with, so they don't have to fax contracts. And
yeah, I also like the fact that some of the publishers are okay with scanning signatures. That was always like a very big deal on contracts, because some publishers actually would bind their contracts, so you'd get a little booklet essentially. But increasingly, some of them are kind of letting that slide, which is cool because it definitely speeds up the process on like the very end of acquisitions. But yeah, outside of that, like I don't really know what else would stick afterwards. Like I don't know. I still feel that I'd like to go back to the office almost full time once everything clears up.
I was gonna say, like, how much do you think that stuff on do you think that stuff on the Japan side will stick around? Like, not having to use fax machines anymore? Do you think that's one of those, they finally weaned themselves off of it, so they'll accept it now?
I hope so. I don't know, honestly. You know, old habits are hard to break, obviously, but at least with a couple of the mid-sized publishers, I think that could be a thing that happens more, or a thing that sticks around. I'm not sure about like a Kodansha or Shogakukan, but
I'm hopeful too. And like outside of manga, I do regular translation, like business and travel and those things. And I've had to translate a lot of things about the work style reform, as they call it.
Oh.
And it's a big topic in Japan these days because of, even before the pandemic, with the kind of like Burakugyo, the kind of black companies that like overwork their employees, and a bunch of other things that have happened. There's been a push to kind of make things more flexible, and that includes with coinciding with the pandemic. There are a lot of people who are working from home, and they're seeing this as like a way to kind of like join that movement anyway. So hopefully this will be part of that. In addition to other things that kind of make working in Japan a little less brutal for our people. So yeah.
Yeah, interesting. And I guess like the follow-up to that is like, how is like manga production and manga creation kind of standing up to the pandemic at this point? We kind of discussed this a little bit last time. What was that, 3 months ago? And times were kind of tough from what I recall, just with retail kind of slowing down, and as you've already mentioned tonight, like printers having a lot of issues. Now that we're a couple more months in, have those things shifted at all? How are you feeling about how the industry is holding up against this pandemic right now?
I'm not as close to the numbers as maybe Ed is, but it doesn't really seem like there's been some small changes, but like nothing big that I've noticed. I mean, some places aren't buying as many books as they used to, but that's just kind of like the way it was. And there's been some recovery I've noticed from some of the retailers and things, but it's still not a huge difference. Not a real recovery yet. And even on the digital side, again, I don't have like hard numbers to kind of use here, but from what I've seen, it's just like there's little spikes here and there depending on like how promotion goes. And some people are obviously relying on digital more than physical right now, but I'm not noticing something to be like, yeah, this is a big thing right now. So
yeah, same. I feel that relative to 3 months ago, numbers are looking a little better. Obviously, stores are now more open than they were before.
Mm-hmm.
Say like in May, or even worse, like April. But from June on, things have improved. I won't say they're at 100%, obviously, but it's definitely not as gloomy as it was sales-wise on at least on this side of the ocean. And and I totally agree with Ajani. In regards to digital, it's something that I think people were hoping would really be taken advantage of given the circumstances, but outside of like a slight increase, I'd say maybe like 5 to 10% or so. I haven't really seen like a big rush for that type of content. Like even on our side, we just launched our own e-reader and web store, and obviously our catalog's really small, but yeah, we're getting sales there, and it really helps to have more of the cut of a transaction that way. But if we're just talking like a couple dozen sales a month, it's not a real lot, even if you get 95% of the sale instead of 40% of the sale. But one thing I will say that I think at least on the Japan side, I think when we last talked, there were a number of magazines that were pushed back a couple of weeks or maybe a month, or some of them like skipped issues. Seems like things are kind of gone back to normal for the most part over there. Yeah, more things are digital only now in regards to magazines or series just launching digitally only. But yeah, for the most part, things as a whole seem to be a little better there, or a little more closer to normal. Even though, as Ajani mentioned earlier, depending on the publisher, things can be, a little slower than they were in regards to communications.
That was a trend that had kind of started before this, though, in some ways, though, hadn't it?
Just things moving to digital?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think this is kind of just accelerating things a little bit more, though.
Sure.
It's kind of like, I think I may have mentioned this the last time we talked, but it's kind of like when 3/11 happened. Like, people were hoping that more digital activity would happen back then, which is why like Morning 2 was like really pushing that, and like it was free for a while back then, so it was like Shonen Jump in Japan. But it wasn't until like after 3/11 where like most of the publishers decided, oh yeah, we need to do this in earnest. So like every magazine was available digitally at that point, almost. And now, well, there was like obviously still a print edition, but like increasingly, like that's a lot of those print editions of the magazines are starting to go away. So, and we can even see that with increasing frequency with Jump too. Like a lot of those manga from that we get to see on their app and stuff, they're from, some of them are like digital only releases too. So
right.
They get tanks once they're done. I think isn't Spy Family one of those, or Chainsaw Man?
Chainsaw Man isn't, but Spy Family is.
So they're examples of even some of those titles breaking through like significantly too. So
yeah, it's not like a limiting factor like it used to be.
Yeah, which is interesting. That is something that, like, going back to that first question, like, we're licensing, or we're getting a lot more recommendations from Japan for things that are digital first. Like, Japanese publishers are letting us know about those. I guess it's because it's really low risk for them too, but if they're able to get additional licensing revenue, it can be a lot more fruitful. It's
sure.
Cheap on one side, and then you get money on the other side, so it's like a double win under those circumstances. Obviously, not everything's going to be Spy Family, but you never know. Hopefully, Lockdown Zone will be popular. We'll see.
I think we talked about this a little bit last time too, but as you said, and I'm pretty sure you mentioned the same thing last time, it hasn't really made much of an impact on digital sales here. Yeah. And what do you think is the cause of that? I know you and I have discussed in the past that kind of digital sales kind of hit a peak here and kind of started tapering off, like books in general. And now we see like, all right, so everyone has to stay inside. They can't leave their house. They can't go to the bookstore. But it didn't seem to make any kind of appreciable difference to sales. Where do you think that hesitation comes from for like manga readers in the US or in the West?
I'm curious to see what you guys say, because I guess for me, I'm not as much of I don't read a lot of digital stuff, so it's kind of hard to put myself in that, in their shoes and kind of understand that. But what did you guys think?
I mean, like for me, I switched to primarily digital probably a year before all of this went down, so like 2 years ago now. And a lot of that was because I read a lot of comics and didn't want a bunch of books in my house anymore. Like that was my big motivating factor. And then I just have a lot of devices that are handheld and have large screens that make reading easy, like an iPad or a bigger phone, stuff like that. But like to me, it became like, oh well, this is usually cheaper and it's instant and it's something I have instantly. So those two things made it much more of a value to me, or much more like there's a lot of advantages to it for me. Whereas like going to the store or ordering books, there's a lot to that. Like I hate buying books from Amazon personally because everything comes damaged, like that kind of thing.
Right.
And I don't go to the store, so I can't buy stuff at Barnes & Noble or a local bookstore or whatever.
Right.
So it's kind of like a no-brainer.
So what do you think, like, what are your thoughts on, like, why people aren't doing it, though? Not doing the same?
I'm not sure. Like, that, I mean,
weird, right?
I brought it up. Like, it feels like if you, like, it's easy to make the assumption that, oh, people can't go to the store, obviously. And even like, oh, people can't go to the store. And also Amazon for a long time was basically going, stuff like books will be here, will get to you in weeks if you're lucky.
Yeah.
For a while early on in this thing. But for some reason that didn't translate to people reading more digitally. And I'm not really sure, or any like a major shift, like a 5-10% shift is an increase, but it's not a major increase. And I'm really not sure. Like one of the, like, I wonder how much of it is that for a lot of people, manga is very like impulsive shopping when they're in the store. And the nature of online, like digital, like booksellers and the way they work is, unless you're seeking something out, you're kind of hit with a deluge of stuff, right? Like so if you go to the bookstore, you go to the Barnes & Noble and you walk down the aisle of manga and you'll see, like, I'm going to use Naruto because it's the thing that popped into my head. And you see like Naruto and it's like they have like one of them facing out. So you see the cover, hey, this is this thing I know. And then you buy one or something like that. Whereas if you go on the online store, you see literally every book everybody is publishing in a lot of cases. I wonder if there's a choice paralysis issue.
Yeah, one of the issues within like the publishing industry as a whole when it comes to ebooks, like ebooks as a whole have also kind of dropped. I haven't been tracking that as much during this period, but like year on year, like there was a point around like 2012, 2013 or so, where ebooks, like at the advent of the Kindle and the iPad, once those things started to really, everybody was getting those essentially. Just regular ebooks versus print, ebooks made up around 37-38% of all publishing, which is significant. Like that's not a joke when you start talking about like a $18 billion industry. But at the same time, one thing that bigwigs in these major publishing houses realized was a lot of that was seasonal, and a lot of that was contingent on new, essentially new gadgets coming in. And it was pretty much like every Thanksgiving, Christmas, you kind of like right now with cell phones and the like, you would get like another iteration of a Kindle, right? Before we had like the paper white, and there was also like the magazine size, and there was just so many of them. They got smaller and better screens. That wasn't necessarily impacting manga all that much, which was interesting. But I don't think manga was best served, say for example, on Amazon that way. And after a while, when things started to kind of shift away and the numbers started to drop, I remember being in some of these big publishing conferences, and one of the concerns was specifically with Amazon, was discoverability. It's a term that I really, really hate, right? But it is an interesting topic because it goes back to what you were saying, Pat. Like you go onto a place like an Amazon, or even more so like the Apple iBook store, which while it's focused, it's really hard to search through.
Oh yeah.
So finding things, getting introduced to other things, it's not like seeing just shelves of interesting covers and spines that you just be like, oh, I'm just going to pluck this off, or I'm going to test this out. And then on top of that, I also feel that with everything kind of being mixed in together, there's a lot more fragmentation too. So which is kind of goes back to another issue that publishing, particularly with the manga publishers, have had. When they initially started to sell light novels, or even worse, like kids books, like children's manga, those books would be shelved not usually with the manga section, right? They'd be in the young adult fiction or the children's book sections, right? In which case they would just kind of be buried alongside things that are well known, like, I don't know, The Hunger Games or Dr. Seuss or whatever. And yeah, sometimes a few of those books would do okay, but you take that same kid's book, let's say it's like a Zelda book, and you put that in the manga section, all of a sudden it does a lot better. Like Chi Sweet Home was always in the manga section. It wasn't in the kids section. I think it would have a very different result if it was in the kids section.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of goes back to the discoverability too. It's just like that type of fragmentation really kind of hurts. To go back to like your original question though, like why hasn't that like really improved right now? I really don't know. And it's like I would really wish maybe some other time we can figure this out if we do another one of these. But I would really like to be able to sit down with maybe a rep from Bookwalker, say for example. And the reason that I say that is they're a site that just do manga and light novels, right? So it's not exactly the one-stop shop for everything of both of those, but it covers, I don't know, maybe at this point up to like 60% of what is available. So under those circumstances, maybe a little less, but under those circumstances, at least the customer knows where to kind of go to some extent for that. And I wonder if their numbers have improved at all.
Yeah, I think that would be really interesting to see.
Right, because you would think that at a place where the discoverability as well as the marketing and the promotion, because I know they do sales and other things there, if things are just a lot more focused towards manga, have they seen a little bit more of an uptick? Because it just doesn't seem to be translating. And the strange thing there too, Pat, is like I'm in your boat. Like for the longest time, I would buy print, but I ended up moving quite a bit over the last like 10 years, so I just didn't want to lug shelves and shelves of books anymore. So the majority of my reading is now digital, and I've really gotten even used to having all my book samples from Japan be digital too, which I was resistant to for a while, but I think it's actually a lot better, and obviously for the environment and just cost-wise to go digital that way too. But yeah, I don't fully get it. That's not to say that I don't want to print paper books, right? I understand the value of those also, and it's when you do a nice production, it feels really gratifying and satisfying to have it out there and people talk about it. But I'd be more than happy if people would buy digital as well. One quick little aside to this though is that I will say that I'm not sure if it's just the fact that I'm on the internet a lot more now. I think all of us are to an extent, but I do tend to hear a lot more people specifically asking for paper editions these days, and that also includes things or editions of like digital first type of releases, and that's not something that I used to hear as much, say 2 or 3 years ago.
I have two thoughts on this. They're kind of related. I think one, maybe with you're saying people asking for more print stuff, is that kind of all around, like I think there's kind of like a digital burnout because of all the Zoom meetings and all the stuff that we did. I was like, oh, this is gonna be cool, and then 2 months in, they're just like, oh god, I don't want to look at another screen.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely have felt that, and I don't want to like be on screens all the time. If I can, I'd rather just have a book to look at. And, so that's one thing. But just like in general too, for everything, when sometimes I feel like the world is kind of burning around you, and in some cases literally that's happening. I think like personally for me, like I've had to kind of cut back on a lot of my consumption of like entertainment and things just to be able to get things done in these circumstances. And I think maybe for some people, they might be making that choice to be like, well, this terrible stuff is happening, and maybe manga is not like the top of my list right now. It feels sometimes like there's a lot of potential on the digital side with like ebooks and things that it should make sense that people would go to that in this time. Manga can be healing in a lot of ways for people. It could be an escape. It can be all kinds of things that could really help in this time. But it feels at the same time that you have to kind of have like the stars have to align for that to happen. Like if this were a different type of situation where everyone had to be home, but we didn't have people who were like couldn't pay rent or had lost their jobs or something like that, then you might see a different result where people let's say like some perfect utopia type thing, and then suddenly we are in a new system that doesn't, where people like universal basic income or something, then you might see something different where people have like a set income, and then they don't have to work as much, and they might focus on entertainment and those kind of things more, and creating more, and then that might be an even bigger boom for manga and stuff like that. But I think this situation for some people might despite making different choices now about what they're gonna purchase to soothe their souls.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah, no, I think all that's really valid too. I mean, I don't think the government has done a really good job about things like housing or employment. Mm-hmm. So I can definitely see that like people's priorities changing quite a bit over this period.
So on that note, where should we turn this now? Let's talk about something like maybe that's a little less heavy and fun. So now that we've kind of gotten our pandemic talk out of the way a little bit, I'm sure it'll come back up because it will, right? Like, because it is a giant thing that looms large over all of us. But let's talk a little bit about manga and trends in manga. So what trends do you see in today's manga world? And on top of that, how do you correlate those trends with the titles that you're working on and offering?
Oh, right. Yeah, so this is kind of the first part I think we got last time too. We talked a bit about essay manga, if I remember correctly. That's something I feel that is popping up a bit more. So just like autobiographical stories or biographical stories about people's lives. I think increasingly more publishers are trying things like that. And, to varying results, but it is cool to kind of see that. Just personally, given the size of our catalog, it's those type of things are not going to be key to our releases that much, mainly because, ever so often you'll get like the lesbian loneliness type of story that it just hits with everybody, right? But for every one of those, you'll have 5 or 6 other titles that are also in the same type of genre that they're very good and they're definitely worth picking up, but may not just be a little more challenging to the market, but also may be a little more challenging to produce as well, just because some of those works do require a little bit more nuance in regards to translation and editorial. Maybe being a little more aware of modern culture, not just modern culture, but also what is happening in a different part of the world that not all of very very few members of like the manga industry that's in North America or that deals with North America are based in Japan full time. So like having a really good grasp on that context is, not so simple, even though, we do have the internet and, there's always NHK and sources like that. But, some of the subject matter that's covered is not always discussed that way. So, but, I've also just kind of been seeing, like we said before, that people still read isekai for whatever reason.
Yeah, you have a distinct lack of hot isekais in your offerings, Ed. When are you gonna straighten that up for me?
Yeah, I think people are gonna have to wait a little while longer for more isekai, for any isekai, to be honest. So I apologize for that. Yeah, but also just things like BL and Yuri titles. Those things are those are genres that we are kind of fooling around with in different capacities. It's cool to see that getting a better audience or a broader audience these days, because a lot of that too was really limited for a real long time. I'd love to be able to see more josei available, but while people keep on translating it now and then, it just very few of it does really well. But that is something that we're going to continue to try every so often. So kind of go against the grain a bit.
I'm kind of wondering. Well, I guess to answer for myself, like I haven't been on. My finger hasn't really been on the pulse of things lately, just because kind of going back to before, I haven't been able to consume as much. I had changed my priorities in a lot of ways. When I was at Kodansha Comics, I was really, diving into the magazines as much as I could and could see what was happening and can kind of figure out trends and stuff. And I agree that in general, that the types of content that's out there has broadened, and there are more people consuming that. And that's a good thing. So, like you said, the BL and Yuri and all kinds of things that probably years ago wouldn't have been licensed or would have been a hard sell are actually getting a chance now. That's pretty good. But as far as I'm just curious if what this time will bring us as far as stories and things, and I haven't. I imagine there might be stuff, new titles that are coming up in the magazines that are starting to address that, but maybe it also takes a little while for people to process that, and then for that to come out into an actual fleshed out manga. But I'm looking forward to. I mean, in other media that's happened in movies and things, and it's been series that are being done all remotely and that address these issues, and I'm just looking forward to what manga will do for that.
Yeah, actually, a good point with that. I think that's kind of related to another question that we got, but I have started to see a little bit of a movement in regards to people writing stories about not necessarily COVID itself, though there are a couple of essay manga about that as well. And those can come out really quickly, right? Because not all of those are serialized. But just seeing a little more push for things that are a little more apocalyptic in general. I think this was really. I'm not sure if the timing was intentional, because I think the timing was more tied up to the Tokyo Olympics, but Japan falls.
Japan sinks.
Japan sinks.
Oh yeah.
That kind of had this weird edge to it that was maybe a little too harsh in regards to that in some extent.
Mm-hmm.
And
that was definitely more coincidence than plan.
That was definitely more something for the Olympics, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Especially what the content itself was, but they also could have just let it go, right? There was no hang up to release it when there was no Olympics. They could have waited for next year or whenever.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I have noticed a few new series pop up, particularly if I remember correctly through Shogakukan and I think a couple by Kodansha as well. that are taking on the topic. Not so much head on in regards to COVID outside of those essay comics that I was mentioning, but just the fact that people, maybe in this like in these isolated bubbles, which I'm really curious about too. Is like, how are people going to be rendering that? I'm sure it's not all just going to be people wearing masks, even though those type of characters are also popping up in manga more these days, or at least I'm seeing a lot more of that online. But yeah, I have a feeling that specifically because serialization takes time, right? Within like, I'd say if we were to talk again like at the end of the year, we'd possibly be hearing about a few series like that, because I don't think a lot of that is running in like the shonen magazines too much right now, but in the seinen magazines that are a little more monthly or semi-monthly, they're popping up here and there. I'm really curious to go through them and consider a few of them.
Yeah, that's an interesting project in that, like, it's like, all right, so we end up with a lot of stories that are people working through this thing that just happened, right? And it's like, is that something that's gonna like appeal to a lot of people? Right. Like exploring those things? Do people really want to look back on it or look at it in the moment? And how it'll be interesting to see how those things click with people, or if they click with people, is what I'm trying to say.
I'd definitely be interested in that. I feel like the past year has just been like something new every day, and I really haven't had a moment to kind of process it. And if I could do that through media, that would be cool. I'd love to see a manga that addresses, it doesn't have to be about COVID directly, but this disease, or like how we see ourselves in like isolation, or there's lots of different themes that you could work with. So I'm looking forward to that. I mean, and there's other stuff that happened. I mean, in America, there's all the political stuff. I guess that doesn't really affect Japan, but I'm sure there are other issues that have come up in Japan that wouldn't have that are like new issues that that wouldn't have happened before.
I mean, it's not like things are politically stable over there right now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like an interesting topic for that would be like, this is also a little more coincidental, right? But one of the publishers over there released a book, an adaptation on incidents of a slave girl, the biography by Harriet Jacobs.
Oh, wow.
And it's really coincidental because it's running digitally, and the first couple of chapters, actually, I think the first chapter came out like a week or two before the George Floyd murder. And it got a lot of talk online in Japan, just because of the timing.
Oh.
And people there not really knowing too much about some of those concerns. And obviously there were protests over there as well. And people kind of wondering, what type of stance to take on that. Because it's, I think you definitely know better than Ajani, as someone who's lived there as well, and who's Black. But there's a very large Black community in Japan. So, and just being a foreigner in general is kind of weird there in some ways. It's not horrible.
Yeah, no, definitely not. And it's a different experience from being in America. But
yeah. I looked through some of that book. It was very interesting. I know at least another publisher has made an offer for that. It'd be really interesting to see how some of that translates to English if it ever does come over. And it'd be even cooler if like more stuff that take on subject matters like that are available. Not just exclusively to COVID, right? Like Pat said, there are other topics that I'm really curious if how mangaka are going to take on like Abe stepping down. Like when Koizumi left, there was the legend of Koizumi, the martial art manga.
Yeah,
there were a lot of weird references to him in different ways in different manga, but like Abe leaving is a very big thing. He's been PM for so long. I'm sure people are going to talk about that in some sort of capacity. It'd be funny if Shima Kosaku's hanging out with Abe now that he's retired.
One would hope.
Yeah, I know, right? And obviously, the Olympics not happening. It not happening is also an interesting topic, right? There was some stuff, there was obviously a new Captain Tsubasa, and there was a new whistle that was being done for that type of stuff. Maybe even some other sports manga might have been kind of looking forward to that, but it's been put on hold. So I wonder if some of the publishers are going to start, spinning their wheels to try to figure out how to incorporate that in their manga. That would be interesting.
I mean, that's happening no matter what next year, right? Is that what I heard?
That's what they're insisting on.
Yeah.
If people who compete can't get there, then it's a whole different issue, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's definitely plenty of topical subjects to cover. It'll be really interesting to see how much of that will get translated, though, right? Because those are generally the genres that don't usually get brought over. So for me, when I was when I brought up even in regards to the COVID manga, those are the type of things that I would like to do a lot more with a DENPA. People keep on asking what type of genres we look into, and it's that's not really our thing. But what I do like to look at is what is topical, and that type of thing really gets me going. So, which is why we have things like a Pampania, or why you have things like a Fate, right? I think these are things that are trendy in that time, and I think it's kind of cool to be able to do some of that, but that not just about genre, So.
And on that note, we are approaching an hour already.
Oh, okay.
So my final question for the panel today: have there been any books that have posed unique challenges for you during localization, such as translation, layout, lettering, printing? And have there been any solutions to those issues that you've been particularly pleased with?
Well, for me, so I've mostly been doing editing, but I've been kind of getting back into translation. And that's been a whole thing, because I was very used to editing, and I realized how hard translation can be to be at the beginning of that process. But I'm working on Blue Period for Kodansha Comics.
Oh yeah.
And that has been incredibly difficult. It's rewarding once you kind of figure it out, and it's something I'm excited about. I went to art school, so I have some familiarity with how this goes. Of course, the Japanese system is very different, but that's part of the difficult thing, that it has to do with art, has to do with a system of the university system in Japan that is just totally different from what Americans know. And there's a lot of things in there that don't really translate, the recommendation system that they use for admissions, or and even within the terminology they use for different art techniques and stuff, there's a lot of ambiguity, or it's just not exactly one-to-one conversions of how this should work. One kind of concrete example that one example that kind of came up with me that was interesting was the sizes that they use for canvases and paintings.
Oh, right, yeah.
Are based on a French system that was used in the 19th century. But then, because it was done in the 19th century, Japan was still on the shaku system for measurements.
Mm.
And so the measurements are just a little bit off from the French system, and it became its own thing. And I think in Japan might be one of the few countries in the world that actually still uses this system for the painting sizes. So there's a lot of that, and on top of that, the manga itself, the writing is there's a lot of unfinished sentences and a lot of reading between the lines, and it's almost impossible to do any direct translation, because you really have to kind of understand very clearly what's going on in order for it to make sense in English. It's probably one of the hardest things I worked on. I worked on second to that was The Ghost and Lady. And that was challenging just because of like all the research I had to do to make sure it matches it was a historical fiction and real events and real articles and books that were referenced in there and Shakespeare, and I had to make sure that all of that was accurate. So actually I had to end up like going to like libraries and looking at I'm surprised I didn't have to look at like the film stuff or something like that, because I actually did look at old newspapers from Britain at the time just to make sure that the articles matched and stuff. Mm-hmm. That was a lot of work, but this is a different thing. So that's my challenge right now.
Yeah, I think difficult for me. Like a good story I like to tell in regards to this is working on a Velveteen Mandala, because it, despite being like a weird like zombie comedy, it has a real lot of pop culture references, has multiple karaoke scenes. A whole chapter is written in Sanskrit, so I had to kind of figure out how to incorporate that and also translate it. For a one shot, like that was very interesting, and I wasn't really thinking about it too much when I acquired it. I just thought it looked really cool and topical. So that was a little challenging. Just on a day-to-day basis, working with like cooking manga is always interesting because measurements and technique is very different in certain cases. There's a lot of ingredients that are not available in America that readily available. Also little things like, it's gonna sound really horrible, but like Japan has like a bazillion a bazillion names for fish, and in English like 3 or 4 different types of fish can just be a mackerel or a sardine,
depending on like where it's like located in the ocean.
Yeah, and over there it's like so everything is so like specific. So like really going into detail for things like that has been a little challenging through time. In regards to like production values, every book is always interesting, and it's always really fun to be able to have crazy looking books. Like we worked on Futurelog with its PVC cover and 2 dust jackets and like all the fold outs and like four different types of paper inside. That was really crazy, and it literally took months to do the proofs for that. I don't wish that on anybody, to be honest.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
But at the same time, it's super satisfying when just seeing something like that accomplished. But it's you particularly when it comes to proofs, like it gets really frustrating how much time that takes, because you're constantly sending things back and forth from you to the printer, and then on top of that, how much it costs too, because you're overnighting things for the most part. So that's another $50-$60 each way. So it's that seems to be an ordeal.
I know for when I was at KuroCon Comics, and I think this is still the case, the most intense projects are always the box sets.
The box sets, yep.
Box sets just take so much time, and like the proofs are like every time we get something, depending on the printer and like how to like measure all the things, make sure everything's accurate, and that's like one little thing can throw off all the other measurements, and it's almost to the point like it doesn't seem worth it, but actually box sets sell pretty well, for at least in KuroCon Comics case. So there's always going to be box sets coming, I guess. But from an editor's perspective, it's like the worst. I think I don't want to put words in people's mouth, but most editors really hate working on box sets. People would rather not do them.
Like I can't imagine working on the Akira set. Like that box itself is so like the way it opens, and
for many reasons, I feel like I've blocked out that experience working on the Akira box set. Like I'm glad it got me my first award, but like, and it became out to be a very beautiful book, and the box set is great. But yeah, it was a lot of work. I feel like I lost some of my soul working on that.
Well then, I think with that, I think we can say goodbye to another manga industry roundtable at KuroCon. Thank you again to Ed and Ajani for joining me.
Yeah, always fun.
Yeah, this has been great.
Enjoy the rest of the con.